On the screen in front of us is a photo of Marie's stitch out of a design that she's digitised from the same artwork that Carol used in her demo videos for the Pathing Challenge. Now Marie, you made it 4¼ inches by 8¼ or 11 centimetres by 21. So that's just a little bit too big for the RE hoop, and my guess is that you used the 230mm by 230 square hoop. So that means that secure hooping becomes important, and I think the clamps help to hold things in place to minimise the possibility of any fabric shift, as does the iron-on stabiliser that you used. And you stitched out with the 90 purple tip, and my understanding is that that's a modified needle. It's a modified blade that helps protect the thread from abrasion when it's going down through the fabric and back up again. Originally developed for, I think, quilting, as the needle was meant, the shape of the blade around the eye of the needle is supposed to help protect it as it's going down through the wadding or the backing. And the same applies obviously as it's protecting fine embroidery thread as it's going down through the tough fabric and stabilizer, so that it's not got as much opportunity to abrade the thread. So ideally what should happen is there should be fewer rough edges or likelihood of thread snapping or shredding. The degree to which it's successful or not, I don't know, because I don't use purple tips. Having said that, I wonder if that played a part in being able to stitch out these rush heads here, because those are some quite tight embossed fills. And if anything's going to cause some abrasion and shredding, then that's the perfect kind of fill to do it. Of course, one of the nice things about the embossed fills is that it gives sort of a contrast between the matte and shiny on them, and that actually helps in terms of the overall artistic effect that you get from an embroidery design with the luster that we get from the thread. So for example, on the sunflower leaves, and these ones are the leaves that belong to the sunflower, by using the different stitch angles here, when you see this in real life and the light, the luster of the thread shines differently and creates the interest. And then of course you get the shine going in this direction with these, the stitch angle of the petals on here that radiate out from the center out towards the tips of the petals. When they catch the light, it's different depending the angle of the stitches, and so it adds this visual interest. And of course the other little piece that does that with that is a contrast again in terms of the style and almost the relief in the picture are these little feathery fronds which were made with the motif runs, and then pulling it together and providing your roots for your travel lines, which is always the gift of this kind of a design, are the stems which you did in satin stitch. One or two of them, I was amazed that you managed to get away with them because they are so narrow. For example, that one, it's only 1.5mm across. These here, my machine actually managed to stitch them, as did yours, are only 1mm across, and those are sometimes the things that when you use a tearaway stabilizer, they can, especially on this narrow satin, they can actually thread the stabilizer, and sometimes you can get a little bit of wiggling. Because you use the iron-on tearaway, I suspect that that's why it didn't happen. On my stitch out that I did, I used a cutaway. But even so, these stems, they are the ideal opportunity to run the travel lines under, and in fact one escaped here, and it escaped on my stitch out as well. Of course, the other side of this is that when you get lots of stems like this, is you actually have to unscramble what goes where, because you end up with overs and unders and overs and unders, and oh goodness me, it's like trying to sort out spaghetti junction, isn't it, when you're doing the preparation and the planning. Spaghetti junction is a road system in the UK, in the middle of England, and it's madness. It is. It's a huge thing. I suppose in Australia you'd liken it to trying to negotiate your way around the maze of Brisbane Airport. But that's exactly what we have to do when we're preparing this for digitising and we're doing our planning and prep. Anyway, what we'll do is we'll take a quick look across to the stitch out that I made of this, and I'll just show you what happened. Well, everything was going great, very smoothly, stitching out fine, no problems at all, although the digitised design that you submitted that I used to do this stitch out has one of the leaves taken away from it here, and I suspect that by taking that leaf away you may have nudged a couple of things, because down here there were just a couple of stray start and end points on some of these stems here, and I just wonder whether moving that leaf and deleting it, maybe something else went with it that was a connection between one or two of these things, or maybe something got moved around. Just a minor point, but what I wanted to draw your attention to was this embossed fill here. Now I've stitched this out on it's a fine cotton blend of, think of a man's shirt, it's that sort of weight of fabric, on a lightweight cutaway stabilizer, and I used a size 11 needle, and in fact these threads are Madeira rayon. Ordinarily I'd use a polyester, but this time for some reason I used a rayon, and I had so many stops and thread breaks on this embossed fill and up here, to the point whereby I thought, you know, I really don't want to put my machine through this anymore. And in fact what it was, not about a density issue at all. On this fill, when I went back and I looked very closely at the design where the stitches are digitized, there are some very, very tiny stitches in there, and every time we got to some of those tiny stitches it just would not cooperate. So I think that with that purple needle that you've got, you know, I think maybe that might have made the difference for you. So it's a pity really I didn't get a completed design. I did put this in just to see how that went, and in fact the only other issue that I would mention is everything's fine with densities, is there is a little hard line around there. Well, you'd expect that really. It's not armor plating, it's just a feel for noticing. It feels a little bit tight and hard here. This, because it is only 1.5 millimeters across as a stitch width, and it's quite a dense satin going up there, does feel like a little cord. But other than that, everything's fine. Densities are great, and in fact I think most of them are around 0.43, 0.45, and that's something that my machine likes too. So maybe you should be delighted, Marie, that your machine actually managed to stitch these out. I know that you didn't recall what thread it was that you'd used for it, but never mind. And so what we'll do is we'll go over to the design now, and as you can see I've put it into hatch. And I thought, I know that you digitized it in Janome version 5, but immediately after doing it you took the plunge and you started with hatch 2. So I thought it might actually be helpful to use hatch 2 for the feedback, although a lot of this feedback is not about the program itself or the tools that the program can do. A lot of it really is about a thinking process, and I think that's something that Maggie always encouraged us to do, was not just think about what the software does and the digitizing part of it, but to think of it in the bigger picture about, well, okay, what are you going to use this design for, and how might you go about it? In other words, to take a step back from the process and say, can I do this in a different way? But of course some of these tools are darn useful, they really are. And one that I just want to look at here whilst we were on that, or close to looking at that subject of this embossed fill and these small stitches, what I will do is go over to objects, and then I'm going to select this. I would get a travel line, I always manage to do that. If I was looking for it I wouldn't find it. And of course here are the symbols, that tells me that it is an embossed fill, and that tells me obviously the closed object. That's what we're going to look at. I'm going to zoom in on it at very high, 500. I'll need to just scoot across to it, so I hope that I don't move. Take it out of true view by pressing the T key, and what I've actually done is I have set it up so that we can see the needle points. When you put it into digitizing view like this, if I put it into true view you can't see it, but if I then click true view to switch it back off, you can then see, or hopefully you can see, all of this. And in fact you can even take it up to 1000, because we're going to be measuring some little small gaps to see what the actual problem was. I'm just going to scroll down, so hopefully it won't send the screen dizzy. Now the default setting on this program and on Janome 5 is these needle points will show in white. So the first thing to do is to be able to get them into a colour that you can see, depending on what your background is and depending on what thread colour it is that you're using for this. And where we find it is go to background and display colours. And you're already familiar probably with these little boxes here. So this first one is here, the background, and you can change the background to whatever colour you want. I've selected white. The same for the colour inside the hoop. So I've selected white, as you can see here, because it just makes it easier for me to see a dark colour against it. You can choose whichever you want. What I want you to consider is coming down to this bottom area here, and it says display colours, and you can actually choose these. So when you select an object, I have it on this one set that it comes up as a fluoro pink, mainly because I probably don't digitize with that colour, so if it's showing fluoro pink, it's a clue to me that I have got an object selected. I set the unsewn stitches to a lightish grey usually. I can set them to other colour stitches. I use this a lot because I still use this travelling through when I'm examining stitches and so on, because it lets me look at things stitch by stitch. Now the default colour for this one is black, and it makes it difficult to see, I think, so I always turn that to grey. Object shapes, that's in black. When we're talking about object shapes, we're talking about this line. It's the trace line that shows there, also known as the vector line. Grid lines, I just leave those at grey. Now guidelines, so that I can tell the difference between guidelines and grid lines, I tend to put my guidelines into green. And then needle points, it's normally set by default to white, but I'm going to use a white background, so that means I wouldn't be able to see them or not see them very well at all. So I want to set it to purple, and then I click OK, and then that gives me the settings. And the fact that these stitches are showing as fluoro pink tells me that I have got an object selected, in the same way as that black band around the object in the resequence bar also tells me that I've got an object selected. So of course I want to deselect to come off it. We're going to measure. If you recall, on the stitch out that I did, all the snagging and snarling, or most of it anyway, was coming up on the edges. I had a couple on this side, but mostly it was happening on this side, and that kind of makes sense, because when you think about the needle going down, and it'll go down different distances depending where it is on a row, but of course when it's coming to the edge, it might have to take little short stitches or little half gaps and so on, and that's sometimes where they can end up very, very small when you're dealing with these embossed patterns, and it's something to look out for. Can't always get away with it. It's what makes them a little bit tricky to use sometimes. So let's press the M key to pick up a measuring tool, and let's go and measure some of these. Here's a stitch. Okay, so I'm going to click onto it, left click onto it, that part, and then I'm just going to hover over the next bit here, and that is measuring at 0.48, not quite half a centimetre. Now when you consider that a needle, a size 11 needle is going to be at least what, 0.75, 0.8, even 0.89, just depends on the make obviously, but let's have a look here. That 0.39, it's not even half a millimetre. That's not even half the thickness of your needle. So it's no wonder if it then wants to go down the same hole, or it's struggling to get past something, why the stitch may not form properly. Let's take a look over here. That looks like it could be quite a short one. From here, and just hover over the next bit here. Again, it's only approximate, but it does give you a very good clue. 0.39, so again, not quite half a millimetre. Alright, that's enough of that. So just press escape key until the tape measure disappears. So what can we do with this tool? Well, what I want you to look at is down here on this blue bar at the bottom, you will see the stitch count. 28,235. Now let's make a note of that. I'm going to write it down here. 28,235. 28,235 stitches in the design. So it's perhaps a final check, or I could perhaps put in a design that I've bought and I want to check it. And one of the things I want to do is say, you know what, I want to make sure that there aren't any stitches that are going to be too small that might cause me problems. Here we go. Design settings, remove small stitches. Yay! Alright. When you get the default setting, it's usually at 0.3. I actually like to have my minimum stitch lengths a little bit longer than that. I usually set them at 0.89. And that's just for my run line stitching. However, there are occasions when I would have it shorter. Say for example, if I was doing freestanding lace, it'd probably be as small as 0.5. And I would never set this less than 0.5. So what we're going to do for this design here is I'm going to select a 0.7 because you were using, if you recall, a size 90 purple tip needle. So that means that you're almost a millimetre across on your needle. So let's go for 0.7, and let's say I want you to sort out any stitches in this design that it's possible to sort out that are less than 0.7 millimetres long. Now, I mean, we're talking a very, very small stitch here. Now, watch this number at the bottom here. I'll come back to it in a minute and I'll tell you what it will read after it does the magic. But also, just here where there are quite a lot of small stitches, see if you can focus on that as I press OK, and let's see if you can see what moves. Yeah, did you see it? A little flicker as some of these needle points were taken out, and for example that one was just extended and this one here was extended, and so of course it's got rid of quite a lot of them. And let's see what the number's gone down to. 26,372. So having done the sums, it's taken out 1,863 stitches that were shorter than 0.7 millimeters. Now, what's not to love about something that helps your machine and helps your designs become machine friendly like that does? And so we'll take it back now to 100, and I'll put it back into True View, and I'll put it back into True View and I'll select Fit here. Now, there's no discernible difference as I can see. Obviously we would then have to stitch it out, and perhaps we could do a comparison just to see whether in fact it degrades it in any way. I personally don't think it does. Now, I know that Mbird users have had this kind of a feature for quite a while. I think it's great that we have it in Hatch, and it should be incorporated into our process as we're digitizing and also as we are checking designs that we've bought or acquired or have done a bit of messing about with. The resizing's usually the biggie with this one, isn't it? And who knows, hopefully it'll actually be in Janome version 5.5 whenever that lands on the shores over here.